When we study the Bible, we must always study the Bible in its context. And that's not, well, we're going to abide by the rules. That's the way we ought to do things. It's how we learn things from any written material, is to understand the context. If I were to make a statement to you that it's not a man that walketh to direct his own ways, and I know that the way of man is not in himself, a lot of you would know where that passage is taken from. But when I say I know that the way of man is not in himself, just to make that statement, and you assume it is scriptural, what would you think that means? The way of man is not in himself. If we think, well, it literally means that man has no choice, no will, it's not in himself that's walking that way, that he's not responsible for that. If you take that particular position, you're fighting Ephesians, the 2nd chapter, where we're all sinners because we've walked the way of the world. We've gone the course of this world. I thought we did not have that way before us. That, man is not able to walk his ways. He's got to have something else happening. But we know we're responsible for the way we walk. We have a choice if we're going to walk a certain way. So this evening, I would like to look at that statement in its context and just see what we can learn. Because Jeremiah, the 10th chapter and verse 23 says, the way of man is not in himself. We have a lot of choices. We can take a lot of roads. There are a lot of signs that people want to give. This is the way that you ought to go. But we realize here the way of man is not in himself. And yet he's responsible for the way he goes. So what does that mean? And I want us to understand, first of all, that this statement has got to be true on two bases. First of all, Jeremiah is speaking to Jehovah. O Jehovah, you do not try to kind of be divisive with God. You don't try to cover up for God. He knows your heart. And he says, Jehovah, I know something. This is a personal confession to you. That secondly, I have an understanding. And that, Jehovah, I know something. We can know things by what God says. We can know things about what man says. We can know things by experience. And by experience, Jeremiah can know something that he knew as he stands before God and speaks to God. Oh, Jehovah, I know. I've seen with my eyes. I've seen around me that the truth is the way of man is not in himself. Would that change how you would interpret the passage? Would it enforce your point? It's not in me to choose my own way, oh Lord. I know this from experience. Or would it be coloring your thoughts, maybe in line to what is the context? And Jeremiah offers itself, and I've taken two different ways with Jeremiah 10:23. And I realize that both of them are right. Both of them are right. And yet I did not realize that before. But you study the context, you begin to realize that that's what he's driving at. And we'll try to bring that out with the particular terms he uses for man. When we think about this passage, we need to first of all understand that the first part of this, man needs God's direction. You can make your choice, you can go your way, but I know by experience, Jeremiah says, I know that the way of man, choosing the right way, is not up to him. Because I know he's made a mess of it. That's what Jeremiah is saying by his experience. Man needs God's direction. Why? Because he's so influenced by others, like maybe other nations. Jeremiah 10:1 and 2. Hear ye the word which Jehovah speaketh unto you, O house of Israel. Jeremiah is now addressing the people. He knows from his personal confession to God, knows something. But in the first part of this, he's addressing them. Thus saith Jehovah, learn not the way of the nations. Be not dismayed at the signs of heaven. For the nations are dismayed at them. There must be something about those stars up there, because the nations over here, the Persians over here, Syrians over here, Babylonian Chaldeans over here, they say that means something. And so that grabs your attention. We're over here in Israel, and God made those things, but we go to God for direction. And because that we're influenced by others, man, it's not in man to direct his own ways. Because he is so influenced by others, he can be going the wrong way, and usually does. Isn't that what happened with Israel, wanting a king? What's the difference between the king and the judge? A lot of difference with them. God had governed his people through judges. They would reject the teachings of God for a while, bring forth an enemy, and then bring forth another strong judge who would redeem them from the hands of those nations, and then they'd turn back again and turn away from God. Over and over again that took place. There came a time when Samuel got old. He said, your sons aren't real faithful either. Why don't we get a king? In 1 Samuel, the 8th chapter, verses 5 and 6, listen to what their thinking is. You want to go this way? Men do. And they're influenced by others. Behold, thou art old, thy sons walking not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. Like all the nations. I want to be like them. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed unto Jehovah, and Jehovah said unto Samuel, hearken unto the voice of the people, in all that they say unto thee. See, God lets you make your choices, but it never was in you to choose the right way. Because you're kind of fallible. Just because they have one, you want one? For they have not rejected thee, but they've rejected me, that I should be the king over them. God was the king over them when they were being judged by the judges. And they didn't want it that way. They found a kink in Samuel's armor. Age. Found a kink in Samuel's armor. Your sons aren't real faithful. And therefore, we want somebody else to lead us. And we want to be like the other nations around us. Do you like to keep up with the Joneses? Do you like to be other nations? Our political leaders want to be like the other nations. They seem to be more sophisticated. In different times of our history, that becomes the case. And that's the way man goes. And Jeremiah has seen that by experience, because that's what his people have done. They've gone into their idolatry. The first part of Jeremiah 10 is dealing with their idolatry, and they like to worship the heavens. And that seems to be something to that, you know. In reality, it's not. Man needs God's direction because he cannot see the vanity of his own foolishness. He thinks that's real substantive. He thinks that's solid. So let's see what that's like when God's people are going after idols. For the customs of the people are vanity. It flees by because there's no substance in them. What do you mean by this? For one cutteth a tree out of the forest. The work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and hammers. Why? Well, we don't want it to move. You mean a hammer and a nail is going to nail your God down? We don't want it to move. We prop it up. Doesn't it look pretty? It's not just a piece of wood. Look, it's got decked out with silver and gold. The glitter. That makes it real special. And yet it's just a tree cut out of the forest. And the workmen work it with their hands. And they don't see the foolishness in that. Jeremiah wants them to see that. Because it is vanity when they look like that, when they act that way. American Standard says they're like palm trees of turned wood, work. You know, let's turn it on a lathe and make it look real fancy. And stick it out there in the cucumber patch. And see if it can keep the crows away. It doesn't say anything. It just standeth out there like the palm tree of the turn work and speak not. That will scare the birds away. And that's a powerful God, isn't it? They must needs be born because they cannot go. Well, you wanted to hammer him so he doesn't fall. Now, how's he going to move? Well, you're going to have to bear him. Do you not see how foolish that is? God would do that through Isaiah to show man, how smart are you when you go the route and direct your own steps in idolatry. And sometimes we can't see that. We think that's smart, that's wise, that's permanent. And it's not. Man needs God's direction because really we become very brutish. We're like animals because we're not going to acknowledge and reverence God. The Bible speaks about that as being brutish. Look at verse 6 of Jeremiah of the 10th chapter. Because here is what they should know. There's none like unto thee, O Jehovah. Thou art great, thy name is great in might. Who should not fear thee, O King of the nations? For to thee doth it appertain, for as much as among all the wise men of the nations. Get all the wise men of the nations that want you to worship the stars and want you to worship this stick of wood over here that you had to nail down and you got to pick up in order to take him someplace. And all the royal estate, there is none like unto thee. But they are altogether brutish and foolish, because they do not honor thee, O God. Just pause there. Why would a man honor something that he can't see? And I could see someone standing here, you haven't seen God and you want me to fear him. Here we use man's knowledge and his skill, his workmanship, and I can see that. But I can't see anything about your God. Oh, you can make that argument, and you may choose that way, but it's foolish. It's foolish. And you're really like a brute, an animal that cannot see past his own experience that he's having. We pick up at verse 8. He says, but they are altogether brutish and foolish in instruction of idols. It is but a piece of wood. Don't you know that? It's just but a stalk. It's just pine. And you call it your God? You don't have any more sense than an animal does. Man needs God's direction because pride causes us to refuse to have God in our knowledge. It's not because we can't think from the standpoint, how did these things get here? The wisdom that brings things into existence. Things we cannot see stands behind the things that are here. We can't see timelessness. We can't see eternity. But God dwells in eternity. And by his power and his wisdom, these things are here and they're functioning yet today. The sun and the moon and the stars giving direction, but they're not our gods. Who put it there? And Paul will make this point with them in Romans, the 1st chapter, in his generation, where people are going after the gods. And we see in Romans 1, 22 and 23, watch this, professing themselves to be wise, they become fools. They change the glory of the incorruptible God. The wood will rot. Things will corrupt. God is incorruptible. And they change it for the likeness of the image of corruptible man, of birds, four-footed beasts, and creeping things. They profess themselves to be wise, but that's not necessarily true. You're really foolish because you do not acknowledge God. So what happens? Verse 28, and even as they refused to have God in their knowledge, God gave them up unto a reprobate, undiscerning mind. You want to be brutish? You want to remain stupid? You want to remain like an animal that cannot see beyond and use your knowledge and intelligence and thinking to realize, how did that get here? And who got that person who got it here? Who created them? And all of a sudden God said, no, I'm everlasting. I'm always been here. There solves the problem. But no, that's too simplistic. But God reveals things to us. When a child asks you, well, who made God? Who made God? Nobody made God. How did this get here? Well, God created it. Who created God? You end the discussion, and it's a mark of faith based upon knowledge of God's Word that gives us direction to think this way, that indeed God's eternal. He's the first cause. He's always been here. Well, how did life begin? God is life. He brought forth life. And living begets living. God's the answer. But we'll refuse that. And we'll do it on the basis, I can see this, I can't see that. And therefore, I will not go there. I'll refuse to have Him in my knowledge. And God says, okay, choose your way. Choose your way. So that's why we're saying we're responsible for the way we go. But the point is, man needs God's direction. That's Jeremiah's point. He has to see it by experience, Jeremiah says. God, I'm talking to you. And he's telling the truth. Man needs God's direction. And when we do that, we will find ourselves to be walking in a wise way. In Proverbs, the 3rd chapter, in verse 5 and 6, a proverb that I think all young people need to memorize, and we all need to memorize it, but it's one you usually memorize when you're young. You go off to school somewhere, trust in Jehovah with all thy heart, and lean not upon thine own understanding. We go to higher schools of learning. We have professors that tell us this is the way you ought to think, and you're moved to go different ways. They'll present things to you never thought about before, and it shakes your faith. And you have to be strong, but trust in Jehovah with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. Investigate them. See how that contradicts God's Word, or what do we find in God's Word that help me understand that's a false way to go, or that might be a right way. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct thy paths. See, men who think themselves out of their pride that they are wise, they don't acknowledge His way. They don't acknowledge Him. They're not going to have Him in their knowledge. So we'll go our way, but He will direct your path. Man needs God's direction. The way of man is not in himself, because we make our choices, we have things that influence us, and we go away, and we all go the wrong way. Because we have been serving ourselves before we serve God. So Jeremiah wants us to know that, and Proverbs says He'll direct your paths. Look what Jeremiah says about man's heart. In Jeremiah 17, 9 through 11, 11 has a great illustration for us. The heart is deceitful above all things, and it is exceedingly corrupt. Who can know it? Oh, if I know my heart, we say that. So if I know my heart, well, who can know it? Well, I know what we're thinking, but we can't trust it. And it's exceedingly corrupt. We can move so quickly just by wanting to be like somebody else, be smart as they are, have what they have, and choose our ways that satisfy us. But he says, they're exceedingly corrupt. Who can know it? I, Jehovah, search the mind. I try the heart, even to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruit of his doings. Do you see Jeremiah preparing us that when you do choose your way, there's a judgment coming. There's a price you're going to pay. And Jeremiah is looking at that. For example, let's take riches that you did not earn. Maybe you took it from others by extortion. You robbed a bank. and you have these riches. He says, as the partridge that sitteth on eggs, which she hath not laid, so is he that getteth riches and not by right. In the midst of his days they shall leave him, and at the end he shall be a fool. There's a partridge sitting on eggs that she didn't lay. When they find out that, hey, we don't go together, she's gone. And he said, that's kind of like riches we have that don't belong to us. Soon they're gone. God has a way of bringing judgment. Sometimes it's in time. Sometimes it is a nation in Jeremiah's day that's getting ready to suffer Babylonian captivity. But you and me, we're looking at a judgment, universal judgment in the last day. And we'll give account of the way we chose. But what he's saying here is that we need direction because our heart is corrupt. And to have that wisdom and knowledge of God who knows the end from the beginning is a great place to be. Proverbs 16:25, there is a way. Notice, a way, one way. You experience, there's a way that seemeth right to a man. He's come up to these signs on the highway. He's come up to which route should I go? What would be the best way for me to go? There's a way that seemeth right. But the end thereof are the plural ways of death. It's just another little lane on the way to destruction. And your experience may be the first one. I doubt it. People have probably been that road before. It's just your way is just another of the many ways that lead to destruction. Man needs God's direction. And leading up to verse 23, he's stating that. He's making that point. But we've already seen he's opened the door for judgment. And so we see this second part of this particular verse. The way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. Well, is he just making a parallel statement? And he hasn't changed things? One of the things that's been interesting is that the Hebrew word for man is different in each of those parts of the verse. The way of man is what we might say anthropos in the Greek Septuagint, meaning mankind. And how true that is. Mankind, we make a mess of choosing the way that we should go. We've all been walking the way of the world. That's why we're sinners and we're responsible before God. But here he doesn't use that word man. Tells me he's taken it another direction. This word for man is one that has authority because a lot of times this word for man is the husband. Sometimes he's an authoritative person, has power. And so it's just not mankind going the way of mankind. It's somebody that has authority to say, you ought to go that way. Or has authority that says, you're not moving me. I'm not going anywhere. I have the husband. I am the head. I'm not just any man. And I may have authority as a king, and that type of power. This word in the Hebrew is used for that. And so what it means, it's not a man that walketh in that kind of a position to direct his steps. With authority said, this is the route that I'm going to go. And I want us to notice Jeremiah in this immediate context is hitting on that. Because what does he say? Leading up to verse 23, notice what he says, what it helps us understand the context. In verse 22, now verse 23 is our passage, but verse 22, leading up to that, he says, the voice of tidings, behold, it cometh, and a great commotion out of the north country, to make the cities of Judah a desolation, and a dwelling place of jackals. When Babylon took Jerusalem and burnt it to the ground, when the Chaldeans did that, Nebuchadnezzar, the various villages and cities around Jerusalem, they were desolated. Some never rebuilt. And it's just going to be a wasteland. What does he say? Judgment is coming. I hear it from the north, because the Babylonians were coming from the north, from the northeast. And Jeremiah is pleading with people not to go around. Don't leave idolatry. That's been the wrong choice. And then before he makes the statement of, "Oh Jehovah, I know," he says, "I hear the tidings that cometh, a great commotion from the north country. Desolation is on its way." And right after verse 23, what does he plead for? "O Jehovah, correct me, but in measure, not in thine anger, lest thou bring me to nothing." Judgment's coming. And they're standing before a God, and you're not going to be able to withstand his indignation. Can't see him. We'll serve these other gods. You made your choice. And there's not a strong man in your midst. Oh, mankind, we go our way and we make the wrong choices. But there's not a one of you that says, "I will not come under the judgment of God. I am in authority. I will direct my steps." Leading up to verse 23, you got the north country commotion, desolation, it's on its way. And God, just don't completely annihilate me, because you got the power to do it. Temper your wrath. And what God would do was do that. This was discipline. 70 years, I'll bring you back. But Jeremiah knew, indeed, this is coming. You cannot avoid God's judgment. And if you think you can, and you say, "Well, I don't have to direct my steps in accordance with God," that's not wise. But the consequences are there. Because there's not in man with authority, man that has some power, so I will direct my own steps. You cannot avoid the judgment of God. I don't care who you are. And sometimes God does it in time, and he will do it in eternity. And I just think of all the powerful people that have lived, that got away with so many things. They're not going to get away from God's judgment of righteousness in his day. Look at what he says that shows you how foolish we are sometimes, because he's experiencing the judgment of God. Go back up to verse 19. "Woe to me because of my hurt. My wound is grievous. But I said, truly, this is my grief, and I must bear it. Judgment's coming. My tent is destroyed, and my cords are broken. My children are gone forth from me. There is none to spread my tent anymore, and to set up my curtains." Were these young people, his children, were they killed? Were they going to be killed in the time of Jerusalem being conquered? Or are they just going to go off into captivity? Jeremiah would stay behind. But he says, "My tent's torn down. I don't have anybody to set it back up again. The cords torn up." And that's where they dwelt. Do you feel like your home is your place of security? That's your place of refuge? We have a place to get back to. We feel protected, and we try our best to keep ourselves safe. And we think, well, I think it will stand about 150 mile an hour wind. Then something comes along in nature. It may not knock the doors down, but they'll flood the floors. We feel like it's things. It's temporal. It's not everlasting. Who would have thought that the great United States, the place where we make our laws and we are free people, would have the people's house, ransacked the way it's been the last 2 weeks, it's shaken a lot of people because they cannot believe it happened. I don't think it's shaken them to the point of, now I think I'll turn to God. They say, I just can't believe it happened. Not to us. Pride. Pride in man. Pride in our power. And when God's judgment came upon his own people, they could not escape it. They don't have their tents. Where were their spiritual leaders? Where were they? For the shepherds, verse 21, for the shepherds are become brutish. That's what these people are that worship the idols. They're like brutes. The shepherds? Oh, surely we misread that. That's got to be the sheep are brutes. No, the shepherds are brutish. They've not inquired of Jehovah. Therefore they have not prospered, and all their flocks are scattered. That's a sad picture. We put our confidence in our leaders. We put our confidence in our king. We put our confidence in our priest. And they all let us down. They all let us down. They didn't even inquire of God. Jeremiah has been imploring them to do so, and they don't inquire of God. How should we go? The way of man is not in ourselves. How should we go? And he's sending Jeremiah. First of all, look how foolish it is to serve the idols. Why be like the other nations? But you know, the way of man is not in yourself. You need me. And here you are. And all you do is look back. They failed us. They failed us. Men are fallible. God's not. But I appreciate our elders keeping our doors open for worship as God would have us to worship, and demanding that we keep on doing the teaching. We've done that. We haven't missed too many sermons. I did when COVID hit. But we would preach 2 sermons a week. We'd teach the classes. Sometimes it was empty auditoriums, but we kept the teaching out there. Hopefully the flock is listening. But they demanded that truth be taught. They've always demanded that. They seek it, and they want to apply it as it's written. I appreciate that. Because we're wasting our time if we're just going to have, well, let's just talk about it. Jeremiah's talking to you and me in the way men make their choices and what men think about themselves. But places that they would think, this is my refuge, my house. This is my refuge, my shepherds. Surely they're okay. They're telling us we can do this. And they haven't inquired of God. Did God teach that? Does God say that? And while we're not, again, perfect and infallible, this is. And what we do is I want to know what God thinks about it. And I appreciate our elders. That's what they demand of me, who preaches. And I appreciate that, because that's what I demand of myself. It's a waste of time to give you the wisdom of men or your think-sos. But one day, men who thought, well, I will determine how we'll get to heaven. I will determine this is important, this is not. Well, may one day find out, no, you thought wrong. Because I know one thing, we cannot escape the judgment that is going to come. And therefore we must be ready for that. Are you ready for this great day that's coming? We want to walk each day with our Father. We sung that before with our Lord before we got up here to preach tonight. And the next song is the second part. The first part is that I want to walk with Him. I need your direction, oh God, and I'm going to follow that direction. That's the first part of Jeremiah 10. People of Israel failed to do that. Will you learn the lesson from Jeremiah and say, I want to know what God says about it, and I will direct my paths. I will trust in thee with all my heart. I will not lean on my own understanding, but I'm going to acknowledge you, and you will direct my paths, oh God. That's the wise move to make. We sung that before the lesson. Now we look at the second part of Jeremiah 10. There's a great day coming, and you will not escape the judgment of God. And the question is, are you ready? Everything you hold to that says, I won't be judged, is not going to help you in the time. All the things that you consider a place of refuge to hide and blame will not change it. We have to face God. As we sing this song, it's a great day when you put your trust in God. And when he comes again, you be glorified with him and go to heaven. That's a wonderful day. That is a great day. But it is a great day on the other side of the spectrum when you have to face a God. And we all have made the wrong choices. We all need God's direction. But when you do not acknowledge that, and you made that choice, here's the next thing's coming. No man can direct his own steps. It says, I will avoid it. You can't do that. So why not get ready for that day on the joyous side? Come as we stand and as we sing.